Thanks very much to Tricia and to Gerry for, I think, a very personal and a very political film, but a really compelling one with remarkable use of photography and archive for any of us who've gone through that period, and for those who haven't, how illustrative it is of that whole period. Tricia, I want to start with you because our time is short. I just want to ask you about, how you approach something like, making a major and a comprehensive biography of a major historical figure like Gerry Adams. Is it a matter of building trust first and foremost, which you did over 40 years of knowing him? Because Trish started with the teaching kids how to use cameras in Derry in 1981, so she's been around for a long time with her commitment to Ireland, and she lived there for 5 years in Derry. So is it from your knowledge of Gerry at that time, were you already planning it, or did it come later?
It's the only biographical documentary that I've ever made, so it's not like
It's not on.
Is it not on?
Okay.
Hang on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. It's the only biographical documentary I've made. My films mainly deal with issues of culture around photography, essentially. So it's very different to anything that I've done before. And I wouldn't have. I was somebody here, Alan Maher, who is a producer here in Dublin, who said to me, why don't you ask Gerry Adams if you know him a bit? Why don't you ask him if he'd allow you to make a doc, Tricia? And I was like, there's no way, he's never gonna say yes. But he persuaded me to meet with Gerry, and we talked about it, and that possibility then arose. So I think we went through various phases. Do we include other voices? Should it just be Gerry's voice? We filmed other people, but it was in the edit room that I decided to keep it to essentially, obviously there is some archive that has other voices in it, but to keep it to Gerry's voice with images and film. It was like a unique opportunity. Let's listen to him. And so that emerged through the process rather than being a decision.
It's an extraordinary choice and a great choice because, so many documentaries depend on talking heads, depend on commentators and friends and enemies to tell the picture of someone. And what we got, because you relied on a series of interviews, we got with Gerry Adams, was we got a very personal and a very evocative picture of him, if I may say so. So maybe I will come back to you, Trish. I might move on to you, Gerry, and just ask you, well, first and foremost, a Ballymyurphy man. What comes over in Tricia's film is very much that by the age of 16, you were the person you were going to be. And then it was just what happened on the streets of Belfast and Ballymyurphy in particular that continued your political education. But that really it was family, it was community that had already decided you.
Yeah, well, a couple of folk on our waste and IFI, I was Tussa Fosta, Betty, I was Gohara, the Carla, Tricia. So this is a Mexican film, and it's Tricia Zip's film, it's not my film, so fair play to her. And I learned a good bit about the process just from being part of it. It took 5 years. There were times in that 5 years that I forgot that we were making a film. There were big gaps, and COVID came into the middle of it with much more disastrous results for other people. And I've said many times that I wasn't really politically conscious on till my mid-teens or 16, 17 and so on. But that I was nationally conscious, I was very aware of being Irish and so on. And there were no real overt influences, but just in terms of doing a wee bit of writing and, on other bits and pieces, it is hardly surprising that I turned out to be a Republican, just because of my family background, from both my maternal and paternal grandparents, steeped in trade unionism and unionism and all of that. And you know, I'm writing a wee bit at the moment about British penal policy in Ireland, and I don't have any recollection of knowing this before, although I'd be surprised if I didn't. But I was in the prison ship Maidstone, but 40 years before that, two of my uncles were on the prison ship, a different prison ship, the Argenta, and male and female family members were in prison at different times, in the 30s and the 40s and so on. So I was shaped by that to a large extent, and I say in the beginning of the documentary, the consciousness of what was happening in other parts of the world, and the power of television. I mean, people were getting beaten off the streets in Derry for the previous 40 or 50 years. But it was only when RTE actually filmed it on October the 5th that the world got to see what was happening. So all of those things, yes, all of those things did inform and frame my politics.
One of the things that I think comes over very strongly in the film is the whole issue of the prisons. And when you were yourself a prisoner, I'd just like to ask you how shaping was that of you in terms of comradeship, but also in terms of political development, and in a way you're coming into a position of leadership within the cages in Long Kesh. And I mean, I can't ask that question without saying tonight the question of Palestinian prisoners in the hellholes of Israeli jails tonight, that maybe you might have a word for them too.
Well, I used to resent when some journalists described Long Kesh as a university for Republicans. I used to, I'm not saying I was right about this, by the way, but I used to think it, you know, so we were all stupid, you know, so we got arrested, so we got smart, you know. What the prisons, I think, did, and I'm still friends and comrades and still steeped in the lives of people that I was in prison with 50 years ago. And I mean, I did 4.5 years in prison, spread over a period. I meet people that did 24 years in prison. You know, I meet people, I met a guy one time, and he had done 14 years, and I was at a meeting, and he was at the meeting, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm still learning my lesson." So it brought that sort of sense among those of us who stayed the course and didn't lose the plot, a sense of very, very deep and impossible to describe connections, and also, you know, the highlight of that can be the proper term of the 1981 hunger strikes, and the 5 years that the women and the men were held in dreadful conditions in Armagh and in the Hates blocks, and all the families that brought out, and mostly led by women, like the RAC and all of those other organisations, and the Hates block Armagh Committee and so on. So that endured, and it probably now, only as we all get older and die off, is only now starting to wane a wee bit. But still, the memory of the hunger strikers is entirely evocative for young people today. There was a hunger strike commemoration just 2 weeks ago in Belfast, and a number of young people that it was totally and absolutely amazing, who wouldn't even have been born during that period, but whose imagination was caught by what occurred. The conditions in the Hate blocks now, the conditions for prisoners in England were even worse. And there were some prisoners in Europe and some in America, but the prisoners' families particularly having to travel to England, and prisoners being ghosted, and the prisoners being in 25 or 26 different prisons during their course of imprisonment and moved without any notice, and their families having no notice. That's replicated in the prisons in Israel and the occupied territories and elsewhere, where Palestinian prisoners are being held, and also where children are being held. It isn't just, and women as well. So, you know, the duty for all of us is to stand with the Palestinian people. It's a duty.
Just 4.5 years, only 4.5 years in prison. And I think what comes over in the film very much is, for the first time, the personal story of Gerry Adams and his wife, who, although I've known and met Gerry and many of his comrades over the years, I've never actually known his wife Colette before she comes to us on this screen tonight. And the hardship for a family. You know, she was left there really from the birth of her child until the child was 4.5 years old to meet his father. Would you like to comment on that, Tricia?
What brought me to Ireland initially was my activism in England as part of the Armagh Women's Group. And so before I lived in Derry, I went on several occasions to visit women in Armagh. So it was my feminism as an English woman who brought me initially to Ireland to hear their voices, meet their families, and then eventually I came to set up this photography workshop in Derry, camera work. So I suppose, and I moved to Derry in 1981, halfway through the hunger strike. So Gerry telling his story in relation to the prisons, it wasn't a narrative that wasn't unfamiliar to me. Those years in Derry changed me. They completely changed my identity, who I was, how I perceive the world, how I perceive other struggles. I live in Mexico. It's very different, but there are issues that resonate. So, I mean, I think this film is kind of a third chapter, maybe. I'm going to be 70, so I'm well on in my life, and Ireland took me forward, and those experiences, those visiting Longcash as a young woman, I don't think you ever leave that. It makes an immense impression on you. Yeah. We filmed going back into the cache with a drone, Seamus McGarvey and I, 4 o'clock in the morning, freezing cold. We got into a field of a Protestant farmer with a case of beers in case he came to give him. and we took the drone under the wire, but we went with a man from Ballymyurphy who was an amateur drone flyer who had been in the cache, and it was extraordinary. He, with Seamus, flew this contraption into a place where he had been imprisoned, and then he flew it out. And it was an amazingly liberating experience, apart from anything else. So I think of course those years resonate, they stay with you.
Well, they certainly stay with you in terms of your filmmaking, because your storytelling is immaculate. I really believe that. From watching documentaries over the years myself, I think the way in which you've told this story is absolutely amazing. Hunger strikes, which are dealt with so powerfully in the film, and which, Gerry, you mentioned. There was also the fact that it became a huge political shift in Ireland, and a huge political shift for the Republican movement. How strategic was your thinking at that time in terms of pursuing politics, starting to pursue politics, and in particular the fact that prisoners were now winning elections as MPs and TDs, both north and south?
Well, for my sins, by the time I was 60, by the time it became 1969, I had 5 years of activism behind me, and was ideologically very committed to the politics of Pearse and Connolly and that social and economic dimension of it, and very influenced by Desmond Greaves and his notion of all of this, and firmly of the view that we needed self-determination, that the people of the island needed to have the right to govern ourselves and to decide on our own future. Now, the most strong tendency within modern, up until now, within modern Irish republicanism was the militaristic tendency. That was the strong element. Like Sinn Féin was always there, but it was very much a poor second cousin to the army. And the British dictated, to a large extent, the pace. So if you and you will have covered this in your own career, if you think of the quick change from the mass demonstrations around the civil rights demands to then just the repression and the way the British had managed to militarize the situation. So not only was that almost a provocation to IRA Republicans because of the nature of the occupation and the brutality of the occupation, but also because the British prevented any attempt to develop politics of an open democratic nature. So it was dangerous to go on a demonstration. It was dangerous, you could be arrested, It was detention without trial, and that was part of all of that. So it was only as I ended up in more senior positions that I realised, and I think we all of us need to be very conscious of the fact that Sinn Féin, certainly in my time of national leadership, was a collective leadership. So there may be a focus on me or upon somebody else who's prominent, but I'm only one of many, and lots of people served. And as we started to come to terms with our responsibilities of how do you actually advance the Republican objective of a national democracy, of ending partition, of making peace with the Unionists, of getting the British government out of place, then you have to be strategic. But a lot of what happened wasn't planned. I mean, the hunger strikes weren't planned. They were a response to what was happening. And the same thing had happened, you talked about Palestine, but the same thing had happened when the Brits were in Palestine. The same thing has happened when the Brits were in Asia, when the largest empire in the world. So they did these things everywhere. I often tell people that, and I'll finish at this. When the British Army came onto the streets of Ballymyurphy, I went and talked to a guy who had been in the British Army in Aden, and he said that they're going to come out in a box formation. They're going to unfurl a banner. They're going to, it will say, disperse or we will open fire. The officer will then on a loudspeaker tell the crowd, disperse or we will open fire. He will then point at anybody in the crowd, person in a red shirt, the person that's easily identified, and tell a soldier to kill him. So that's what's going to happen. Months later, out of the Henry Taggart comes the platoon, box formation, unfurls the banner, and it's in Arabic. That's the truth of it. So this is we were one of a long series of almost, colonial or post-colonial or however you meant to describe it. So a lot of what happened was in response. Like nobody would have known that Kieran Nugent was going to say, I'm not wearing it. You haven't the ultimate. No, that wasn't planned. The hunger strikes obviously were planned, and the hunger strikers used a lot of ingenuity and very, very focused attention to how they were going to deport themselves. But nobody would have foreseen that Frank Maguire was going to die. And then the bright idea of could we stand a prisoner, and we deal with that in the film. So a lot of these responses were responses to what was happening on the ground, and it just happened that we were agile enough to build some of that into our notion of building an all-Ireland radical Republican party with popular support across the island to displace what we saw as the old Fine Gael Fianna Fáil system in this state, which didn't serve the people of the north and the majority of people in this state at all. So some of it was, if I can use the term, fortuitous. Some of it was just of us deciding that we needed to set out clearly what we wanted in terms that people could comprehend and understand and relate to. And that remains a challenge today.
I'll just ask you this kind of briefly, because I'd like to ask the audience to come in a bit. You've controversially perhaps always denied that you were a member of the IRA, but you've also, as you detailed in the film, not condemned the armed struggle. How important was that, and in a sense, your friendship with members of the IRA in bringing the United movement with you over the line to the peace process? And I'm thinking of people like, I remember at the time, Joe Cahill, and of course the late Martin McGuinness, having a very key role in that, so that your friendships and your links there.
Well, for me, the key to all of that, if you want to have a movement of activists, and you will not bring about political change in this island without a movement of activists. It won't happen without that, and they don't necessarily have to be Sinn Féin activists. I mean, activists, generally speaking. And it was a realisation that we couldn't do all this on our own, that we needed to work with other people, but we also needed to make sure that our own people were very, very much part of this. That the discussions, the strategy and understanding, that people mightn't know every twist and turn of the deal, but at least they would have an understanding of what the strategy is. And I think that was one of our achievements. And all of those people, and thousands of other people whose names will never be known outside of their own families or their own comrades, all played a role in that. And for me, I mean, the big lesson of it all is, and I say, I'm like everybody else. I have my faults, I have my flaws, and so on and so forth. But I think I'm a sort of an okay sort of a guy, right? So I went to speak at a students' meeting in Trinity maybe 40 years ago, and the plenty young person wouldn't shake hands. And for me, that was, fuck this, you know, because that's what you're taught. Just essentially.
Well, I was going to ask you, but I'm being told we're running out of time. I was going to ask you about that whole period, and both of you about Section 31 and broadcasting ban. But I'm being told time is short, and I'd really love to just get one or two people in from the audience. There's a gentleman there at the back. Yeah.
Hi, Gerry. Good to see you. Hi, Gerry. Good to see you.
Doesn't seem to be on.
Hi, Gerry. I think history is going to look back very positively on your contribution to the peace movement and bringing the Republican movement through essentially undivided. That was a major political achievement. I just wonder on a personal level, and I'd ask this of anybody who's involved in violence or associated with violent political movements, are you at ease with your conscience over what has happened in Northern Ireland?
Yes, generally so.
Okay.
There are many things. There are many things which should not have happened, and I wish that they hadn't happened. But what's done is done. What's won is won. And you know, when you look at other parts of the world, we're in a far, far better place than, as we know, other parts of the globe, and we're very, very lucky, and we need to keep building on that. And it's not over. It will not be over until we end up having control of our own destinies. And the people of this state and the southern nationalists of this state have a big, big, big part to play on that, because until we have a situation where we're electing, whatever hue it is another matter, where we're electing our own government, which then deals with these issues, and the clear understanding of the proclamation in 1916 that the people are sovereign and the people have the right. Basic right to a home, basic right to a job, basic right to education. Doesn't matter if you're a disability or a citizen, you should have rights. So I think that's all in front of us, and it all has to be worked towards, and it should be as much as possible non-party political. And the point I was going to make, and I'm not going on for too long, is that when you consider that the refusal, the big challenge wasn't to get the Republicans to embrace the peace process. The big challenge was to get the Democrats to embrace the process, to get the establishment, to get RTE, to get BBC. That was the huge challenge, because it was easier not to shake hands. It was easier to be involved in just the politics of condemnation.
I'm afraid I'm being told no. I asked for an extra 5 minutes, but no, I'm being told, because there's another film just about to start in about 10 minutes. They have to clear this house and get the next group in. But I'm really sorry I didn't get back to know everybody. Thanks for a great talk, and thanks for a great discussion. Thank you very, very much.